agreement. And out of that cooperation has come two papers on the presentation. The aim of our paper has been to make a review of the literature. What do we know on knowledge creation? And identify gaps in our understanding of knowledge creation, and even how that relates to innovation, because identify knowledge is quite an important aspect of innovation, isn't it? And therefore, our research questions are formulated as how many studies are there published in peer-reviewed papers or journals. What are the main findings of the studies, and do they focus on knowledge creation as a process, an output or outcome, because that is quite different, and what kind of methods were used in those studies. And the background is, as all know, that SMEs are quite important for every economy of the world. They are also very high numerous in high-tech industries. And we quote here Nonak as associate from the year 2002, stating that we actually know a little bit about knowledge creation as well. So that was one of the backgrounds. And also it's an excellent paper written by Michel and Boyd and published in Journal of Knowledge Management. It is stated that we know a little bit about also about knowledge creation process in general, and in SMEs in particular. So that was the background for our research undertaking. And in our review, we tried to figure out and analyze, according to Michel and Boyle classification, where they say that the process aspect of the knowledge creation process is set undertaking to create new knowledge, such as the use of metaphors to externalize knowledge. Whereas on output, they say that knowledge creation is measured in terms of an immediate product of knowledge creation process, usually reflecting achievement and enrichment of existing knowledge, such as representation of our spoken ideas, and then finally as output, and then we have new prototype and services and so on. So that is the three different aspects of the knowledge creation process. And in our review, we follow the systematic review guide presented by Jesson et al. In the book published last year. And as our key terms, we did use knowledge management and SMEs. And as our inclusion criteria, we used publication in the period 2001 to 2011, empirical studies. They have been published in peer-reviewed journals, be in English, SME focus on knowledge management in general, and the old aspect of knowledge management process. And we used the database ProQuest, which is quite broad and includes a lot of good journals. And to be on the safe side, we also looked into through three highest ranked knowledge management journals. Journal of Knowledge Management, Knowledge Management Research Practice, and Journal of Intellectual Capital. As well as International Small Business Journal, Journal of Small Business Management, and Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice. So that is our base that we searched systematically from this keyword. And our conclusion or findings that we had more than 1,000 hits in our search, and after screening the abstracts and even more sections of the papers, 36 fulfilled our criteria general on this on knowledge management in SMEs. And we have published a paper on that, has been accepted in Journal of Knowledge Management, and on that 10 focused on knowledge creation particularly. And the oldest paper is from 2005 and the newest from 2011. Most of the papers were published in 2005 and 2006, so it seems not to be an increased interest in this area. So that is one conclusion of our search. But the main finding is that learning networks and knowledge management tools are the main facilitators of knowledge creation in SMEs, according to these 10 papers. And the number is extremely low, I would say, and I was surprised to find so few studies that are focusing particularly on this topic. And as you will probably see, the link with innovation is quite weak as well. So it's a surprise for us to this conclusion. And in those papers, what stressing learning is that learning is very closely related to knowledge creation. And from that, we could find three things that, for example, one study on the meaning of learning for creating intellectual capital is famous industry expressed that unlearning was in fact an important aspect to be able to create new organizational aspect of intellectual capital. Then we have internal and external learning competences as very important for knowledge creation. And finally, it is very important in the firm to have a learning culture that enhances the possibility of creating knowledge. But most of the studies are looking at networks, and we can summarize it as a social or informal networks. SMEs tend to very little based on their own resources to get new knowledge. So primarily they are relying on customers and suppliers to get information on new knowledge. And in one of the papers it was stated that accountants was the most important source of external knowledge. But customers, and in most of the cases, this is quite interesting, is that the manager of small businesses seem not to use, for example, the internet or the email or that kind of communication, or very limited amount. In most of the cases, it's more personal contacts, primarily with customers and suppliers that they got the information on new knowledge, what was going on. So that was also quite interesting to know that the new technology seems not to be applied that much in SMEs so far, but I think there will probably be quite a different between different branches or industries. For example, high-tech companies, I would guess, use much more internet search and databases than, for example, traditional manufacturing SMEs. But I think that could be interesting future research to look into that. Also, we found only 2 studies that was using some kind of knowledge management tools like causal mapping. There was one study on a construction firm in the UK where they're using causal mapping to try to enhance the knowledge and real knowledge, the tacit knowledge within the firm. And then was another one on knowledge capture awareness tool that were used. So, and most of them, of the 8 of the 10 studies, were looking at knowledge creation as a process. They focus on how knowledge is created in SMEs, and in addition, the study looked into external and internal factors affecting the process. Primarily, the external factors is contact with customers and suppliers. But only 2 studies viewed knowledge creation as an outcome, like suppressing knowledge and externalization, or as an output with product, services, and processes, respectively. So that was a quite surprise. So our conclusion is that we know very little about how new knowledge is created and how that is external and materialized in innovation. So this lead seemed to be quite under-researched area. So we know very little about how the new knowledge comes about, where it is up, and actually how that is affecting the innovation in SMEs. Came as a surprise to us. And most of the methods that are used in these 10 studies were surveys and some interviews. So in the future, I think it will be very beneficial to have some kind of triangulation methods and even as a cross-country comparison. As, for example, culture and many other issues could have quite an impact on, for example, knowledge sharing. So I think that it will be interesting to have some kind of cross-country and even cross-industry. So most of it was in a single industry. I think it was one that looked into 3 different industries, so that kind of issue could be quite interesting. So just to finish off my presentation here, I have here 3 questions. Why are so few studies on this area, which is, I would guess, very important for both the firms, the industry, and the economy in general? It seems to me that the academic discipline has not been looking into this in a systematic manner. That's the first question. The second one, is it so that SMEs are not creating new knowledge? Are they not innovating? And third, how is the link between new knowledge and innovation is so fully connected? So I will end with those 3 questions. Thank you very much.
Ingi, since we've made very good time, I'm just going to ask 1 or 2 things. Do you think there is a prospect of finding more and richer material if you go outside English, or you focus on a country like India, where India has a whole ministry of SMEs and MSMEs? Do you think that by expanding the literature range, you might have had a more comforting response?
Without doubt. For example, if we include grey literature and all that, I'm sure that would be a must. But we decided to have a peer-reviewed journals. And that is saying, okay, still this is not an academic discipline. You would say that. It seems to me not to be an academic discipline. But as we know, there's a lot of literature by consultants and reports and so on. So I think it might be interesting to do a follow-up, maybe to have even degree literature. And I'm sure that we have countless of research reports.
Thank you. So let's open the floor.
I have such a question. You see, I did mainly for 40 years such a learning job, like to input in the factories method like value management, value engineering, and so on. So this progressive method, which is working in work from the Second World War. And I will tell you something, because even the factories finding the very nice result, these small factories, decreasing of the price, decreasing of the costs, increasing of the level of the functional and so on. And it's a brilliant cases for the publishing. You see, and they always know impossible to publish it because it's now our business secret, because if our concurrents will know how we are decreasing the cost and so on, they will use it against us and so on and so on. So I think that there is such a, it's according to me, you see, the main obstacle why you didn't so objective and so much good references from the SME.
I think it's a very good point you're pointing out there, but we have a tradition, as you know, we could use it as a case study, and change the name, and, so there are examples that we can do that without referring too much, but I think the skepticism and fear is quite prevalent in, I think, SMEs who are not used to work with, for example, the academics, think that we can steal the secrets and so on. So I think, good point. Thank you.
Yes, did you integrate some keywords like networks or open innovation? Because perhaps SMEs do not create new knowledge alone, but if we have a bigger picture, perhaps they innovate and they develop, they create new knowledge in partnership with bigger enterprises or other organizations, and even in SMS networks.
Yeah, that's a good point. But we used, in this paper, we used just knowledge management and SMEs, and included all these different processes like knowledge creation and work. But we did a follow-up where we sought particularly on the knowledge creation SMEs, and then we only found 4 more studies. So we were very surprised. So it seems to be. We have sent that paper off to knowledge management research and practice. We don't know if it will be published, but that was the same conclusion, and we were very surprised how few are looking into just, you can say, the starting phase of innovation. So, but we did not look into innovation SMEs. Maybe that will be our future research. But we just focusing on knowledge creation and how how the studies have been looking into the outcome of knowledge creation and how that has impacted. An impact on innovation. It seems to be that that link is quite poorly recorded yet. But as it was mentioned, maybe we should even look into not peer review journals, but just all that we can find on this. And I think that would be interesting to explore.
May I ask you a question?
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation, Doctor. Yeah. In my opinion, knowledge creation will be different from each other, big company and SME. Yeah, so big companies basically based on internal R&D or big research projects, but SME based on open innovation or networks. How do you think about this implication? Do you have
we know that I think that knowledge creation and innovation in large companies that have been most studied, and they have the resources, they have R&D departments and all that, so that is well-known factor, and I think there's a lot of literature on that, but we wanted to look into SMEs because they lack resources, so our basic question is how to do we do it? Because we know, for example, in the ICT industry, small firms are very, very effective on new knowledge. Very often, the big companies buy off the new ones with the new patents and all.
Thank you.
Sorry.
You first?
I was wondering if there was any. What if one of the situations was that in general, the number of articles targeting SMEs, irrespective of knowledge creation, is just less. So you're starting with a smaller universe of papers. And then when you have a more abstract concept that perhaps there's not as much investment or focus of attention at the SME level for, if you were to look at computer usage, I would think that SMEs use computers roughly the same way as larger companies. But in something like knowledge management, that might be a skill or an idea that is not as embraced fully. So for those two reasons, you're not going to find as many papers dealing with that.
That's true. That's true. And always when you do a literature review, the keywords are essential. What we're looking for and what is your ambition, what you're aiming. So now, one conclusion is that we have not found all the papers that are available, and that is always a risk when you're doing a literature review. But as we wanted to be very specific on knowledge creation and be within the knowledge management literature, that was, if we had maybe searched for innovation, then we have probably found much more, but that was not what we are seeking for. We were looking for just the origin of the knowledge management process.
Or maybe family-owned companies, small companies, private, because it depends how SME.
I think that if you look at journal SMEs, then there's a subsection of this family first. So that they are included, I think, in some of this of the paper I was looking at family first. So I think the general view is that we know a very little about it. I think that's from an academic discipline point of view.
Final question, if you may.
Yeah, you pointed out that, if I understood you correctly, that only one paper did stress that knowledge creation was an outcome. Yeah, and the point I want to ask there is, does that mean that there's certain tools from knowledge management or are used to intensify or foster knowledge creation, or is it sharing expertise? And how is this linked with manufacturing? Because manufacturing would be the thing that really needs to be conveyed and so that people can understand, well, let's say, the knowledge creation process.
If I go through the papers, most of them just make the, they can take for granted that knowledge will lead to innovation.
Take it.
There's only one that really looked into what was the consequences and the output. So probably the other one was not that involved or didn't know that, maybe not about it. But they just anticipated that, okay, new knowledge. They didn't focus on that at all.
Thank you very much. I mean, I recall in the past 3 years in Hong Kong, we worked with 600 plus SMEs. Gaining access to them in the first place was extremely difficult. And secondly, one had to admit that there was a very significant proportion whose activities really couldn't be correlated with knowledge creation. If you're a noodle shop, arguably even if you're a firm of lawyers, you're using knowledge, but the knowledge creation element may be a bit limited. So thank you very much. I might invite Stephen to come up and get ready. Stephen is looking at the question of whether when you put people together for collaboration and innovation, for example, in a government, academic and business cooperation background, a number of tensions and conflicts of interest will arise which could easily inhibit the knowledge sharing and the joint creation process. And so we are looking now at this case study about what could be identified as potential problem areas. Thank you, Stephen.
Great, thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Stephen McLaughlin, and I'm going to talk to you this morning about probably even more of a practitioner case study. I'm responsible for research and development for a research unit that's been founded and established probably about 4 or 5 years ago at the National University of Ireland. And that research unit is called the IVI, Innovation Value Institute. The focus really of this talk is very much around the issues that we've seen from a practical perspective in terms of making open innovation work. Certainly been lauded as a very good approach to driving the innovation engine in any organisation. However, there are payoffs, as in everything. There's no such thing as a free lunch, and that's exactly the same within an open innovation space. So a wee bit about this. Well, IVI is very much a Mode 2 type research organisation. You all know what I mean when I say Mode 2, do you? Mode 2 knowledge creation. No? Okay, Mode 2 is very much focused on practical outcomes of research. So addressing real practitioner issues with using scientific method to deliver a solution that can then be used by a wider audience of stakeholders within that space. So, a more cruder definition is that some people would refer to Mode 1 as knowledge or research for research's sake. This very much is driven, what we do is very much driven by a real need or an identified need within an organisational context. So the way we're designed is we obviously have a requirement then in that space to be able to mobilise and quickly respond to research questions and research problems that are put to us by industry. Triple helix is the term that we use because we engage with other universities, industry and government as well at the European Commission level. So very keen to understand the problems and respond and mobilise to those problems in a quick way so that we can actually start to drive some level of research understanding around that. So that's a very, very important point for us. In terms of our methodology or our approach, probably a better term, because we use mixed methods in our research, but our approach is fundamentally follows a design science path, which is looking at producing some artifact at the output of the research. So you go through the research and then you produce some artifact, which could be anything from a framework, a method, a model, that people then can use and then apply it within their own organizational context. So we're made up, because of that, we're made up of about 80 organizations plus, growing all the time. I'll give you a little overview about who those organizations are. So another interesting aspect about how we formed is the more traditional way that research institutes come into being is they develop within the university or tertiary level educational context, and then you find industry partners in order to engage with on research problems. We were formed within industry. We were formed within industry between organizations like Intel, BP, Boston Consulting Group, and we found a home within the University of Ireland, which is Maynooth. And from there, what we did was we wrapped around that the approaches that we would expect to see in terms of valid research approaches. So, been driven to a large extent by industry, but needing to respond and make sure that anything that we produce conforms to the scientific method in terms of its validity, its relevance, and its importance to the environment. So those are the things to a large extent that drives us. I can say there's 80 people within our sector, 80 organizations within our sector, and that's the challenge. How do you bring this disparate group together? How do you get them to work together? How do you get them to, without even going through the forming, storming, norming, and performing routine that we would normally see within any dynamic? Because a lot of the times we're actually bringing people together in a project environment. I just went to something against that. That's the lunch nearly ready, I think. So what's important to us is the network that we have. The research network becomes very, very important. That's good. The research network, because I'm feasibly put off. The research network becomes very, very important to us. And maintaining the flow of people through that research network is also very important too. Because our reputation as a research entity is based on our ability to respond to real world issues. So a challenge nonetheless. So these are just some of the organizations that we deal with on a daily basis. These people are engaged with us. We'd almost see if we can get it to go back when it might jump forward again. Stay. So you can see quite a lot of organizations all around the world, a lot of big players in that space, and these people would have employees that would form what we would call work groups around different research themes, and these research work groups would be ongoing. Right? So we have people that have been working with us from BP and Shell and Boston Consulting Group and Intel and even IBM who work with us on a day-to-day basis around certain projects. Now that's the open innovation aspect. And what was interesting was in the last few presentations, people talked about, well, what exactly is open innovation? Well, that's a very good point. And certainly we look at Cheeseburger's definition in terms of open innovation, but I would probably argue now that's a slightly naive definition because organizations are no longer bounded by a clear line. We work in a virtual environment and people come in and go out of our organizations. So thinking of open innovation as engaging with those people who are outside the boundaries of our organization is probably no longer relevant because that could change on a daily basis. So for us, when we talk about open innovation in an IVI context, we mean engaging with people who aren't necessarily part of the IVI research group. So we might pull in people from other organizations. So open innovation is how we engage with these organizations. And why do we differentiate that between us? Because these organizations have a different set of criteria in terms of what they want to see succeed out of the research. And that's the defining point for us. So what is it? So if you're in an organization and everybody has the same goals and objectives for the research, I would probably classify that largely as a closed innovation environment. But for these people here, they're all coming with a different set of agendas, and we need to manage those within a real-time context. Otherwise, our research doesn't have any value. So we break those groups down, and we've got multi-sectors that we work with. But just to try and give a bit of clarity, we've got academic groups. They're just some examples. These boxes around are just some of the examples of the organizations that we engage with. So we've got academia, we've got consultancies, independent software vendors, end users, and that end user group isn't just large multinationals, it's also SMEs as well. So we are to a large extent mandated by our government to engage with SMEs. And also, as I said before, Stephen pointed out, 90%, certainly in the case of the European Union, it's over 97% of organizations are SMEs. So there's a real drive for us to engage with them as well and bring them into the organization. But that's a challenge for us. That's a massive challenge getting SMEs to step forward into that space. Part of it's down to the fact that they just don't have the time or the resources to be able to support that. That doesn't necessarily mean that the contribution is less valuable. So what we do at IBI, what's fundamentally driving us? Well, you know, we are, like I say, a research organisation, but predominantly we look at issues around IT or the business value of IT. So how does IT help an organisation move forward, develop, be competitive? So what we look at is, to a large extent, and this is probably a very broader view of what we try to do, is we're trying to move organisations along the bottom from left to right. We're trying to move levels, so industry adoption around enterprise standards and procedures that will improve their capabilities. So down here on the left-hand side, right below, you're basically talking about organisations that use data practices, and that's not just around IT, that's about business management practices. Moving along, what we're trying to do is embed standard practices, which then develop and morph into best practice, and then hopefully we start to see organisations coming out at the far end that are driving the thinking around how they use technology, or even how they develop innovative practices within their organisations, the cutting edge. Now, not everybody will be in that space on the right. Right? For people to lead, you have to have people to follow. So what we would try and see is certainly those organisations in knowledge-intensive business services moving along that curve to try and drive some value. And that, to an extent, is the reason why a lot of those organisations that I showed you come to IBI to engage, is because that's the challenge that we set, and that's the promise that we try to live up to. So we look at capabilities in organisations, and not just IT, but we look at the capabilities across the organisation. And why we do that? Well, because going down here at the lower levels, you can see technology has an influence within an organisational context. IT business processes then drive those. IT people are part of that. IT organisation, and an IT capability set sits above that. Now, one of the challenges that we now have within our organisation is that a lot of our members are saying, forget IT, let's just think about enterprise capability, and that's a broader conversation. And I'll give you an idea of the sort of breadth that we're talking about. So what we need to do is marshal our work groups around the challenge of looking at IT capability, which takes into consideration all of those four things underneath it: organisation, people, process, and technology. And that's a significant area for us and for those organisations, because they see that it's sitting one below business value and innovation enabled by technology or even by other processes in the organisation. So there's a hunger for this within our membership. Now, we're not naive. We know that if we move off this, our members will drift like snow off a dike. So this is what brings them to us, and this is what ensures that we have some level of engagement with them. So when we talk about capability, it's a broad brush, and you can see that it covers quite a number of things, from innovation management down here, and these are in no order of preference or importance. We've got knowledge asset management up there, relationship asset management, solution delivery. Some of these are very hard in terms of technology, system service analytics and intelligence. Some of them are a lot softer in terms of people skills and organizational capability. Innovation management, relationship asset management, people asset management, knowledge asset management as well. So it covers a wide range. So what we have then in terms of our research capability is, you take each of these and you assume that each of those is a work group, which it is. We would have between 4 and 12 individuals from that family of 80+ organizations who meet on a regular basis to discuss and talk about the issues that they think underpin those particular capabilities. And that can be quite a broad conversation. And it can be quite a difficult conversation for some people, because I'm sure you're aware, for those of you who've done research with organizations, you know there is one view, and to a large extent it's the organizations. So what you just try to do is capture that and manage that, which is a challenge for us. So what we expect those work group members to do, and there's quite a variety of ways that they can engage, is they can engage by participating on the research and development work group activities. They can conduct what we call pilot assessments as part of the development process, and that's where this is the design science aspect, where we develop a concept around a capability with our industry partners, led by an academic researcher who works for me. And what they then do is they then take that out to their own organizations or other organizations and test it, proof test it, which is part of the research process, the validation process. So we need to understand that our thinking isn't just an internal process, the concepts and the areas that we're thinking about are of value. Participate in work groups with broader ICT management relationship activities. So we've got work groups around, for example, cloud and business adoption, around data center management, some of the more technical. but a lot of them, to a large extent, ICT professionalism is another one as well. And even we're looking at alliances between academia and industry in terms of developing curricula for future business people. So there's quite a lot of areas there that we sort of work in, and it's a challenge for us. So what we did was we had a look at some of the ways that we're interacting with some of our work group members. Some of it can be quite short, some of it can be quite smooth, and it very much depends on the individuals. And we thought was, well, there's a benefit profile here. There needs to be a value proposition for both us and for the people who engage with us. And this is what we found, to a large extent, underpinned the relationship that we have with our members. So from our perspective, by engaging in this open innovation process, we see an increase in desire to participate in knowledge creation activities. We see an increased industry funding for research projects. Why? Because they seem to be relevant and people come back to us. Research driven by pragmatic needs, absolutely. So, we're seen to be delivering something that's of value in terms of meeting a specific issue within an organizational context. And provide access to subject matter experts without the need to hire researchers with specific subject matter expertise. And that's an important one for us. Because what we can't do is we can't expand and contract to pull in researchers around different projects. But what we can do is we can pull on our subject matter experts within the industry to help form our thinking around specific projects. And what we then do is we use a researcher to apply research thinking to make sure from a methodological and method perspective that it's a valid approach. From the research partner perspective, well, we see access to research data in real time. They're part of it. They're also part of the research program, so they get access to the data. Access to subject matter experts in other industries, so there's a strong networking component here that allows people to interact and mingle in what they perceive to be a safe environment. Access to academic research to help support academic validation, and sharing the development costs over multiple member organizations. So you have one organization that's driving a particular area. So for example, we've got one organization in North America, say the name Ernst & Young, very, very keen to understand the concepts of service innovation within a North American organizational context. So what they've done is they've come back to us to say, can we set up a collaborative with other members to try and put some fund money in a pot to try and drive some level of understanding. And the output of that would be around a method or an approach that those organizations could then take and use within their own space. So benefits there on both sides, which is very, very important to us. And we need to make sure that we maintain that balance. Just a quick note on the validity aspect, because we do have a lot of industry input into the way we do things. So we have a very robust, we think, way of approaching the way we look at our research and development. So you can have certainly these slides, and certainly will be available. I think, are we making these slides available to everybody after this? Okay, so feel free to pour over them. My email address is there anyway. So what we do is, a timeline across the top. We're really looking at, to a large extent, most work group activities probably comes in around about an 11-month period from a start to end. So looking at accelerated background research period, followed by content development, assessment, pilot, recruitment of people, and then pilots and finalization, which is really the external validation of our process. So we have this, and what happens is that in all of these red dots, you see that, sorry, red triangles, we have what we call a stage review, and that's where we have an independent group of reviewers, both academic and industry-based, who review the work put in the output of a work group. They are not part of the work group, and they're not part of the initial project definition. They are there to ensure the validity and the relevance and the importance of the output in terms of what we're delivering. So that can be, quite a torturous process. So when we talked about how people form and engage in work groups, it was interesting to say, well, we know there are barriers because, quite often I'll get pulled into a conversation between people where I'm having to try and soothe people's egos or rub them down and tell them not to worry about it, this is just the way of it, or trying to reset to a large extent or negotiate some level of understanding about what the output of the research will be for them. So we looked at it and said, well, people engage in work groups in two different ways. We have the work group engagement and we have the work group contribution. So the work group engagement is, do they even want to engage? Why would they want to come to the work group? What's allowing them to do that, or what's stopping them from engaging in the work group activity? And then the next one is work group contribution, and this is more about once they're in a work group, what regulates or controls the flow of information that they pass into the work group or take out? What are the motives that they have? What are the things, the drives that they have? that control that. And that can be an important aspect for us in terms of a work group success, because you have an individual within the group who is holding back information or seems to be controlling the flow of information. It can have a significant impact on the morale and the trust within that group. And it can basically stop it in its tracks. Now, if you're driving some level of output in terms of expectation for other organizations, you really want to make sure that that sort of thing doesn't really make an impact too often. So when we had a look at the literature, this slide is this slide because I've included the three at the bottom that we've identified. We can see from different sources that we've got different barriers that have been identified: financial issues, marketing skills, management personal characteristics, lead time to development, and then lack of research skills. And what we did was we looked at those across the two types of contribution: how work groups and people engage in work groups, and also how they contribute to those work groups. And through focus groups, and again remember this is an inductive bit of research, so it really only relates to our organisation, but we found it was relevant. What we did was we went down to those groups, we identified in each of those columns how those manifested at a work group engagement level and also at a contribution level. So what stopped people from joining, or prohibited them from joining, or whatever, and then also when they were in there, what, like I say, controlled the flow of engagement or flow of information that they had or shared with the organisation. Am I doing this obviously with my...
You need to wrap up.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. So what we found though when we did focus groups for the work groups, we also found that there were three other areas that we found that had an impact that could be added to that list. And these are, broadly speaking, this is my second last slide. So, conflict of interest among members. So we know, from Davenport that knowledge transfer is an asymmetrical process. Just because you give information doesn't necessarily mean that somebody will ever reciprocate at the same level. But we also found that members were cautious about sharing their knowledge with other members who could be considered potential competitors, and you would have that because people would come to the work group based on the research project, not necessarily based on their own competitive profiles. So this would manifest in members pulling more information from the work group that they contribute. And this had a significant impact, like we said, on trust and also on morale and overall, the overall research process. Conflict of interest amongst members was also an important thing. This is the application of research. And we found was, as research happens, as it's not a discrete process in terms of exactly what you're going to get at the end of it. The process may change or the direction may change through the stages of defining the project. And you would find that some people would come in at the beginning and they would have a significant contribution, but as the process changed and the project changed slightly, they would drift away because they felt that it wasn't in line with their overall organisation's objectives. And then the other one we had was lack of business skills, and this was really where a large organisation would identify some person to be the point in terms of that work group contribution, but they may not necessarily have the right business skills or understanding in order to contextualise the research from their own perspective. So, last slide. So effectively what we said was, in terms of managing these barriers, a couple of things came to the fore for us. And we thought that these to a large extent were augmented skills that we now look for within our own researchers as we go out. We've got about 20 researchers who operate at a postgrad level. So, what's interesting is over the last period of probably 18 months to 2 years, we've redefined the profile of what we would expect and what we want of those people. So things like business sector awareness becomes important to us. How they negotiate, their negotiation skills, working with teams in order to come to some form of compromise. Managing virtual teams becomes very, very important as well because these people are spread all over the world. Task management is important. We need to drive these things because there are deadlines. And business impact analysis as well becomes important. The research, especially, this is a Mode 2 statement, but certainly understanding the impact of the research and what it will have and the areas in which it can be used becomes an important aspect as well. And the last one is very key to us. It's an intervention approach as opposed to a systems approach to research we now take. It's very much about understanding the group dynamics, and then applying the right level of skills, soft skills, in order to manage that. So one of the questions we have really now is, that we're beginning to wrestle with is, do we need a different type of researcher now for this type of research? Is the more traditional view of somebody who comes out with a PhD and then has good research skills good enough anymore? From an industry context, I'm beginning to think maybe not. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge. So I don't know the answer where that's going at the moment, but I think it's like everything else. How the face of research is changing will determine the skill sets that are required by those people who engage in it. But I haven't got the answer to that just yet. So, thank you very much. Any questions?
discussions, we could see that they were around a number of themes which fitted into the overall theme of business adoption of IT. To the extent that those discussions could give rise to innovations, is there a clear guideline on how intellectual property rights would be allocated if something good, if any good rights do come up?
Yeah, we have that. That's a very important point. And that was one of our founding principles, how we would share that. So what we do is that we have a structure where people can access as an industry partner or as an academic partner. And if they come in as an industry partner, they can take part in the research and they can utilize the research as it's happening. However, the intellectual property rights remain with the university. So they are free then to use those as part of their membership, as long as they're paying membership. There's no additional charge to them. But if they stop paying membership, then they're no longer available. They no longer have access to the intellectual property.
I'll have a follow-up question, but when I don't see hands up, I'm going to go into my follow-up question, but I do see a hand up, so I'll be doing.
Thank you, Stephen, for your presentation. First, about your institute, is that a part of a governmental strategy?
Is it part of a government strategy? Yes, it partly is, yes, and you can see down here. So we're a university-based research organisation, but we have a significant amount of funding from the Irish government, which has come to us through the European Commission, European Commission funding, which has come down to us through the government. And that funding is really around developing a centre of competence around IT for business value. So how technology can be used to enhance business capability.
Second question about just the link between industry and academia. And my question is more of a thought. Is it possible for academic research institutes to have this mixing link between industry? Do you need to be even another institute?
I'm not sure I understand. We have the link directly with industry. So the answer is yes, it is possible.
I'm just thinking about the different aspects of for-profit, not-for-profit, and all that. And it seems to be a different kind of paradigms.
Yeah.
It's often very difficult to.
It is, absolutely. We are a not-for-profit organisation, so any research that we do, any costs that we pass on to our members, very transparent. They're to cover the costs of the research activities. So, like any research organisation, we break our research groups down, and we have a cost budget for each of those. So, if there's a new project, we set that up, and that's how we operate. But there are challenges in that space as well downstream. I mean, one of the things, to be honest, that we're looking at is possibly spinning out an aspect of the research group, because it is becoming more involved in the commercial aspect of some of the methods and some of the models that have been developed. And that we really don't want that to be clouding what we're doing from a research perspective.
I was mentioning yesterday morning in the doctoral stream, universities, when it comes, coming back to management of intellectual property, when it comes to the nuts and bolts of registration and everything perfectly competent, and then very often when it comes to the taking an innovation to the point where it's being taken to markets, what we call crossing the valley of death, they are particularly poor. Would that be an inhibiting factor? If I knew that my IP was going to be handled by the university and I have some doubts about the university's ability to actually carry on and sustain an innovation to the market, might that be another inhibition?
I think it could be. I mean, it could be if you're waiting for the final product to come out of the university before you're allowed to use it. But that's not the model that we use. So anybody who's part of the work group can take material that's presented at any stage because they're part of the development process, and bring that back and utilize it within their own organizational context. But it is a challenge. I mean, we are not. It's one that as we're developing now, we're starting to develop more capabilities around methods and models because of the design science approach that we take. We find that we have a lot more products that you could probably say could be commercialized or be commercialized. So one of the discussion points we're now having is about maybe developing a capability that sits outside the university that we pass that to, and then they just take it and develop. that's still under negotiation. But it's not a bad place to be.
May I invite one more question, please? Yes.
The last point you brought up concerning maybe we need new research techniques is extremely important to me. Because I think there may be a difference which you have to identify what kind of background knowledge experts and other people who just talk to each other are interested in. So your point comes in concerning intervening, but intervening not just in a psychological way, but also in identifying some background knowledge and trying to catch up what they know and, so to speak, insert it there, and then find out in which way things can change. And there we do have technologies to do that.
Well, innovation is, is based on serendipity. It is. It's that moment when you walk outside the office and, you're looking up at the sky and you see a cloud and I've got the idea. So, what you need to do is you need to be able to try and develop that capability within your research organization. So I wasn't really talking about new research techniques. I was talking about researchers themselves. What sort of skill sets we now need. And this is only a mode 2 point. So mode 1 is still a different and still a very valid part of research. But certainly for the pragmatic aspects of research where you're developing something that can be taken away, the skills that we've decided that we're seeing coming out, from researchers who are just coming out from the first postdoc, even if they're coming from a business school, they're probably not up to it. There's a gap that still needs to be developed in terms of capability. I get back to that point, being able to understand the context, being able to see the value in something that may not obviously be that obvious, and being able to help understand how you facilitate that solution. So from that point of view, that's probably where I was going at. So it's more about the evolution of mode 2 type researchers that we're seeing a requirement for. And that's quite difficult because when we go to interview researchers now, we find, it's hard to find people like that.
Have you ever looked at the exam education output that people who have a DBA after they have participated in the industry?
That can certainly help, absolutely. So we certainly find if it's somebody who's a mature PhD or DBA student, or even a DBA student because of the virtue of the fact that but even then you probably want somebody who's got some sort of pragmatic experience as well. I mean, those sort of people, to be honest, those are the sort of people that we usually try and hire. However, that said, they're in great demand on the other side of the fence in industry. So academic salaries don't always match those. So you really want somebody who's really keen to develop that research lead. So again, that's a big challenge for us. That's a big challenge for us.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Okay.
Your name is. Are you set up or do you need to just? Good. Yes, indeed. This is escape key. Just close this first. And we just load off there. So we move on now. While Yanni is just loading his PowerPoint. In an interactive process of innovation, there are a number of externalized tools that have become available to help enterprises or groups with the innovation process. Three of them that are among the options available are Handbook of Innovation, innovation sessions, and theatre-based methods. Those are just three of them, but it's not exclusive. And it is very interesting to know which of those three particular methods might be more effective in certain situations. Can we find any data to show that one method is more effective in a certain situation than another? And this is what we have a presentation on now, so I now hand over to you. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Johan Ilko, and I come from Lappeenranta University of Technology, and Lahti School of Innovation is the research unit where I'm working at. I'm a change person professor, and twice I'm a research scholar or senior researcher. And a research unit is some kind of regional unit for Lappeenranta University. It's located about 100 kilometers north from Helsinki. And as you told, it's Lahti School of Innovation. It's a very nice name for the research team. And the title of my presentation is The Effectiveness of Innovation Capability Development Methods. And as you can see, there are many co-authors with me. So we have three, as you mentioned already, we have three methods we have developed in our research unit and tested those methods in real life context in different organizations. And so we have, I have 7 case studies here, and I have been only involved in one and utilized one method, so I'm not expert in every method what I'm presenting here right now. A little bit about the background. As we all know, innovativeness and innovations are critical success factors for the future of the performance of the firms. We all know that the competition is going harder and harder, so we need to regenerate our ways of working and producing things. And bringing innovation to every workstation requires practical tools and processes that can be utilized on a daily basis. And there are many methods and practices for the facilitation of innovation capability in the literature, but less attention has been made to indicate the actual impact of those methods and how they are done in the companies and what their effect might be. So, in this study, we examined the 3 methods that was developed to facilitate organizational innovation capabilities on different dimensions of innovation capabilities. So we have used 3 methods and analyzed them against one definition of innovation capability that includes 7 different dimensions of innovation capability. And the studied methods are Handbook of Innovation, theater-based methods, and innovation session. And I tell you a short description of what those methods are. So the Handbook of Innovation, the purpose of the Handbook of Innovation is to create a concept for employee-driven innovation process, and the methods consist of diagnosis phase, workshops, and documentation. And diagnosis aims to evaluate the current innovation capability of the organization and to identify the opportunities for development. And the most important part of the model is the design of the workshop where the definition of the innovation process takes place. And the results of the workshops are documented in the Handbook of Innovation. And the main thing is probably that the handbook evolves during the project. So we have the target for the next workshop, and it's a continuing development of the handbook. At the end, you have a documented innovation process for your company. And about the theory-based methods, that's not that familiar to me, but we have a lot of people for doing that in our research unit. But the main thing is that the theater-based methods apply narrative and dramaturgical interventions and implement practical actions which concentrate on sharing, repeating, amplifying, and interpreting everyday work processes. And social practices as well to make them visible and to reinterpret and resequence them. And it includes several phases. For the first, the views and practices of each community or work group are articulated and reflected. And this is facilitated by storytelling methods and theatrical pictures. And then the stories are analyzed and devised as performative theater skins. And the skins are played back to the narrators as a theatrical performance in the theater session. And the focus of the theater session is to construct common understanding by using the practical problem as a boundary object. And the last one is the innovation session, and the purpose of the innovation session is to combine the regional and inter-regional expertise for the benefits of organizations' innovation. And each innovation session process is always planned individually, taking the organization's background and needs into account. And the results of the innovation session processes are new business ideas, new concept, new products, new product development project, and so on. And the one-day innovation session includes experts from the client organization, often experts from world of science, like researchers, academics, and the members of intermediate organizations. And the members of the intermediate organizations include creativity, operator, progress, and a secretary. But that was only, and you can find more information about this method from this paper or the references from this paper. And then we used where the results of the utilization of those methods, the results are analyzed against the 7 dimensions of innovation capability, including the participants or leadership culture, ideation and organizing structures, work life and well-being, know-how development, the regeneration, and exploiting external knowledge and the individual activity. This is one pretty wide definition for the innovation capability, but we did that. Actually, this is one of my own definition for the innovation capability, but it's done with statistical research where we take all the statements what was used in the definition of innovation capability, and usually there is only 1 or 2 of those, and I think that it's not possible to be innovative if some of those is not on a good state. And the research approach to multiple case study, we used multiple case study, including 5 companies, 3 public sector operators, and all those methods are utilized both in public sector operators or public sector organization and private companies. And we utilized multiple data sources during the active part of the research and afterwards. So interviews, observations, and questionnaires are conducted almost in every cases. And we have some presumptions. For example, in the innovation handbook, we talk it might be a most impact on the ideation and organization structures, because it is a little bit focused on that direction. And for example, the innovation session methods is something that should impact on creating and utilizing an exploitation of external knowledge. And also we check a little bit about the context, if there is a difference, for example, between private and public sector. At least in Finland, I know that in public sector all the new changes are there is a resistance for every change very much because of the culture that you have, and probably there might be a difference between private and public sector and the other contextual issues. So this research setting is here, and as you can see, there are 3 cases that utilize the handbook of innovation, and 2 cases, case organization that utilize the organizational theater, and 2 cases for the innovation system methods. And shortly about the results, the handbook of innovation affects mainly on ideation and organizing structures and individual activity, whereas the innovation system method impacted on the exploitation of external knowledge as well as on know-how development. And it seems that the effects depend more on the utilized methods than the organizational context. So in these methods we didn't see differences of the results that between the public and private sector or the size of the company. For sure, we only had 2 or 3 cases there, so we can say it so generally, but I think it's more about the concept that the method that we used. And the theater-based methods seem to have an effect or impact on variety of dimensions of innovation capability, and it seems that the utilization of these methods is depending more about the starting points of what problem we are trying to solve. It can affect on different dimensions depending on what is the issue you're going to develop. And here we can see in this picture, you can see that the handbook of innovation, the number one means that the most effective impact is mentioned with the number one, and number two is the second impact. And as you can see, the ideation of organization structures were the main impact of handbook innovation and also the individual activity, whereas the innovation session affected more on exploiting external knowledge as well as know-how development when a lot of people from different organizations. It's a little bit same as an open innovation thinking. And whereas the theater-based methods, there is more variety of the results and there is more deviation of these results. But about the concluding remarks, I say that the study contributes to the literature of two use in interacting processes. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Thinking by stating that it's possible to develop the different dimensions of innovation capability with the handbook of innovation session, theater-based methods, and the study suggests that a systematic procedure, a broker from an intermediate organization, interactive communication, willingness to collaborate, and the management commitment after the active part of development, as well as high coverage of employees participating in the development, allows the most effective and sustainable results. And the earlier literature very much state that these kind of processes should be very informal, but what we had a feedback from the companies, I think there should be some sort of phases to follow. And also the broker was seen, it's not necessary that there is a broker probably from the other organization, but there should be someone to go and break the ice between the different operators. And it is stated before starting this kind of development, you should understand the both approach, top-down and bottom-up approach, but in what we have, the results, we think that the common willingness to collaborate was the main thing. And also the management commitment after the active part of development was important, because usually we think that when we start something, it's important to have a management commitment and during the development of going to the new issues. But we have an experience that if you want to continue with some project, you do some development issues, and our experience is that after the active part of the development, the role of management is maintained to have a sustainable results. And I think for the future research, I think more sophisticated evaluation methods should be developed to get a little bit standardized, make a comparability for the results what you have after utilizing, because there are so many things that affect on the development, so it could be done more comparability way, the evaluation of those methods. So thank you very much.
Let's open now to questions. Yes, would you like to lead on the question?
Can you explain what does it mean sustainable results practically?
I meant that if, for example, if we develop, for example, some kind of idea capturing system, for example, electronic, it means that somebody should be taking care of doing something with those ideas and take care of that, that people are willingness to use that even after the active part of the development. It means that if you get people are starting to ideating and submit ideas, so if you don't do nothing with those ideas and the managers ignore them, it doesn't continue. I mean, that.
Are they measurable? Is it possible to measure
The
them
results,
financially, for example?
Yeah, I think it depends what type of things we're doing. But for example, this kind of ideation systems for search AI, I think it's possible to connect it with financial measures as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
About these case companies and these methods, do you have any kind of effect on the effectiveness of the method with the size or the type of the company? I mean, family company, big corporation, small company.
I think we should done still more research for the effectiveness, because there is certain groups that involved in the feedback is asked from them to people who mainly have participated to the development. So we don't know the effects of if there is a bigger company, one or two in those groups, and we don't know how the new ways of working and doing things have gone to the other part of the organizations.
Your subjects that you studied, your son, I just wanted to understand correctly, they had decided that they would use approach A or method A or method B, method C. They decided that in advance, and they had adopted this method to go through the process, and then you evaluated it.
Yeah.
And I'm just interested as background, are there any sort of control studies of the process that has gone through by a company which has not specifically decided to take up any of the established methodologies?
You mean comparing to the company who doesn't?
Yeah, they just sit around and say, okay, we're going to sit around the table and brainstorm.
Maybe I haven't done that, but it's really interesting. We only try to make some kind of diagnosis at the starting point, and then we try to do up to part of